General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. The GDPR is a regulation in EU law on data protection and privacy in the European Union and the European Economic Area. It also addresses the transfer of personal data outside the EU and EEA areas. The GDPR sets out the principles for data management and the rights of the individual, introducing stringent data protection requirements for organizations and severe penalties for non-compliance. The regulation emphasizes transparency, security, and accountability by organizations processing personal data. Data Protection Officer, DPO. A DPO is a leadership role required by the GDPR, responsible for overseeing an organization's data protection strategy and its implementation to ensure compliance with GDPR requirements. Identifying when a DPO is mandatory, understanding the specific duties and responsibilities of a DPO, and ensuring that the DPO operates independently within the organization are crucial for compliance and effective data governance. Data subject rights. The GDPR provides data subjects, individuals whose personal data is processed, with several rights, including the right to be informed, right of access, right to rectification, right to erasure, right to be forgotten, right to restrict processing, right to data portability, and the right to object. Organizations must ensure mechanisms are in place to facilitate the exercise of these rights in a transparent, efficient, and timely manner. Challenges include managing requests within stipulated deadlines, interpreting the scope of rights in different contexts, and balancing data subject rights with other legal obligations. Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA. DPIA is a process designed to help organizations systematically analyze, identify, and minimize the data protection risks of a project or plan. It is a requirement under the GDPR for processing operations that are likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. Conducting effective DPIAs involves understanding when they are required, integrating them into project planning stages, and addressing identified risks adequately. Organizations struggle with the scope and depth of DPIAs, ensuring stakeholder involvement, and documenting outcomes. Cross-border data transfer refers to the transfer of personal data outside the European Economic Area, EEA. The GDPR imposes strict conditions on the transfer of personal data outside the EEA to ensure the level of protection of individuals is not undermined. Navigating the complexities of cross-border data transfers involves understanding mechanisms such as adequacy decisions to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. The data subjects must also be notified without undue delay. Establishing an effective incident response plan that enables quick detection and assessment of breaches is critical. Organizations face challenges in classifying breaches according to their severity. Legitimate interest. One of the lawful bases for processing personal data under the GDPR, where processing is necessary for the purposes of the legitimate interests pursued by the controller or by a third party, except where such interests are overridden by the interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject. The challenge lies in conducting a legitimate interest assessment, LIA, to balance the organization's interests against the individual's rights and freedoms. Organizations must document these assessments and ensure transparency with data subjects about the use of legitimate interests as the basis for processing. Accountability principle. The GDPR introduces an accountability principle, requiring organizations to demonstrate compliance with the regulation's principles and to document how they comply, through measures such as adopting privacy policies, conducting DPIAs, maintaining records of processing activities, and implementing data protection by design and by default. The broad scope of accountability requires organizations to embed data protection into their operational processes comprehensively. This includes challenges in maintaining up-to-date documentation, proving compliance to supervisory authorities, and embedding data protection culture throughout the organization. Binding corporate rules, BCRs, a mechanism for multinational corporations, international organizations, and groups of companies to make intra-organizational transfers of personal data across borders in compliance with the GDPR. Developing and implementing BCRs involves a comprehensive and detailed process to ensure all data transfers within a corporate group meet the GDPR standards. Challenges include the initial resource-intensive process of obtaining approval from data protection authorities and ensuring continuous compliance. Data minimization. a principle under the GDPR that mandates that personal data collected should be limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Ensuring data minimization requires organizations to critically evaluate their data collection practices and maintain discipline in not collecting excess information. The challenge is in balancing the desire for more data for business or analytical purposes with the legal requirement to limit data collection. Right to erasure, right to be forgotten. Under the GDPR, the right of individuals to have their personal data erased under certain circumstances, such as when the data is no longer necessary for the purpose it was collected or when the individual withdraws consent. Implementing the right to erasure presents operational challenges, particularly in locating and deleting all instances of the relevant data across multiple systems and ensuring that third parties processing the data on behalf of the controller also erase the data. Supervisory authorities. Independent public authorities established by each EU member state responsible for monitoring the application of the GDPR, helping to enforce its provisions, and protecting the fundamental rights and freedoms of natural persons in relation to processing. Navigating the landscape of multiple supervisory authorities can be complex for organizations operating across several EU countries. The challenge lies in understanding each authority's expectations, managing cross-border processing issues, and responding effectively to investigations or inquiries. Privacy notices. Documents or statements that disclose how an organization collects, uses, retains, and discloses personal data. The GDPR requires privacy notices to be concise, transparent, intelligible, and easily accessible. Crafting privacy notices that meet GDPR requirements while also being user-friendly and engaging is a significant challenge. Organizations must balance legal compliance with the need to make these notices understandable to people without legal expertise. Special categories of personal data. Under the GDPR, special categories of personal data include data revealing racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union membership, genetic data, biometric data for the purpose of uniquely identifying a natural person, data concerning health, or data concerning a natural person's sex life or sexual orientation. Processing special categories of personal data is subject to stricter conditions under the GDPR. Organizations must ensure they have a clear legal basis for processing such data, often requiring explicit consent or meeting specific conditions laid out in the regulation. The challenge lies in adequate safeguards and compliance measures. Children's data protection. The GDPR provides additional protection for children's personal data, especially in the context of commercial internet services such as social networking. It requires parental consent for processing personal data of children under the age of 16, or a lower age as provided by member state law, not below 13 years. Ensuring compliance with the GDPR's provisions on children's data protection involves verifying the age of individuals and obtaining parental consent where necessary. The challenge is in implementing age verification and consent mechanisms that are both effective and minimally intrusive.